So it is said that the holy trinity of winter storm preparedness is milk, eggs, and bread. The storm is coming. You hear that you might be stuck at home for several days, and a certain anxiety bubbles up, right? Of course it does, because you're not in control of the weather. But one thing you are in control of is what is inside your refrigerator, right? So you're on your way to Kroger. You are on your way to Publix. You are on your way to Trader Joe's, and you can barely hold back from elbowing the people getting in your way. Arr! Maybe it's just me. It does not matter that I am perfectly aware that my sense of panic is irrational. It doesn't matter. The anxiety still bubbles up. My life somehow feels threatened, and I want to live. But come to think of it, why do people reach for eggs and for milk? I mean, why those when the real winter storm threat is a loss of power, right? Which means a loss of refrigeration, and perhaps a loss of the stove, and definitely a loss of the microwave. So how are you going to cook those eggs, right? And what's going to keep the eggs and the milk unspoiled? It is the bread part of the Holy Trinity of winter storm preparedness. That makes the most sense. Bread will not spoil, at least in the short run. Bread does not need to be cooked. You can eat bread with pretty much anything, in fact. Bread does the best job to soothe our fears, or at least bread that is gluten-free for those who have celiac disease. I want to bring that in because some of you might see me in the receiving line going, I have celiac disease. And I acknowledge that. My daughter has celiac, so that's really painful. Now, writer R.C. Sproul tells a beautiful story that highlights this power of bread that I'm talking about in a different way, different context. After the Korean War ended, he writes, South Korea was left with a large number of children who had been orphaned by that war. One of the people involved in this relief effort told me about a particular problem that they encountered. Even though the children had 3 meals a day provided for them, they were restless and they were anxious at night and had difficulty sleeping. And as they talked to the children, they discovered that the children had great anxiety about whether or not they would have food the next day. To help resolve the problem, the relief workers in one particular orphanage decided that when the children were put to bed, the nurses would place a single piece of bread in each child's hand. The bread wasn't intended to be eaten. It was simply intended to be held by the children as they went to sleep. It was a security blanket for them, reminding them that there would be enough provisions for their daily needs. And surely enough, the bread calmed the children's anxieties, and they could sleep. That's the story. Our unthinking impulses demonstrate something profoundly true about us, whether we are talking about panic-based grocery shopping in the face of some kind of snowmageddon, or if it's baby orphans anxious about starving. Bread represents life. Bread represents what is essential to life. And the inventors of bread, the ancient Egyptians from 6,000 years ago, they formally acknowledged this. The Egyptian word for bread is aish. And the Egyptian word for life is aisha. Do you see how they share the same root? Aish, aisha. Bread and life. And then there is this ancient expression of the interconnection between these two. From this prayer, Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 through 13. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. 2,000 years ago, Jesus taught this prayer to his disciples. And you might have noticed that there are 7 requests involved in this prayer. 3 are directed towards God, 4 are directed towards human living, and one of the 4 is about bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Now, translators have taken the original Greek word epiousios and made it the English word daily, right? But literally, epiousios, the Greek word epiousios, means that which is super essential to life. Not just physical food for our bodies every day, but food for the spirit as often as possible. Give us this day our daily bread. Whether we are stocking up in advance of a winter storm, whether we are tender orphans afraid in an orphanage, or whether we are simply human beings or spiritual beings having a human experience. Eish, Eisha, bread. Life. Bread has certainly been the life of our species historically. This truth has been encoded in ancient myths in fascinating ways. 4,100 years ago, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest surviving great work of literature. And besides the hero Gilgamesh, we encounter his great friend Enkidu, who, when we first meet up with him, is this thoroughly uncivilized wild guy. He's a wild man. But what domesticates him, besides making love with a human woman, is, which is pretty important too. But in addition to that, the book is plain. In addition to that, it's eating bread that civilizes him. And then almost 3,000 years ago, Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And in them, you hear a distinction that might on first glance seem strange, between lotus eaters and bread eaters. The lotus eaters are characterized as people who do not cultivate land or work, and their lives cannot scarcely be called human. But as for the bread eaters, well, they do cultivate land, they do work, and they are truly human in their living. You see, what both ancient works are doing is signaling the inseparability of agriculture from civilization as we know it. Eating grains in the form of bread allowed humans to eat lower on the food chain, and also to consume a greater variety of energy sources. All good things, all representing great advances for us. But in turn, this required humans to settle in particular places for a long time. What was also required was expanding these long-term settlements into cities, and then the cities into empires, for only the stability of city and empire infrastructures could ensure a continuing source of bread in a world that was constantly changing and constantly precarious. Yet a third ancient myth that symbolizes all this together is the myth of the ancient Greek goddess Demeter. Meter means mother, and de means earth or earth grains. So Demeter is the earth mother or the earth grain mother, and accordingly, she is known as the goddess of harvest and agriculture, but she is also known as the lawbringer, because agriculture is possible only where there is rule of civilized law. Historically, bread and life, they go together. And this is generally true, but for some specific peoples, it is true in a unique fashion. And they ask us to eat bread, to remember. For example, the Hebrews, They were slaves in Egypt, and their salty tears never stopped pouring. But God delivered them out of Egypt. They knew that they would need to pack food for the journey, especially bread. But God said, according to the story, don't leaven that bread. Don't put yeast in it and waste time for that bread, for that dough to rise. Make your bread unleavened, God says. Flat crackers is all you need. Pack up and get out of there. And ever since, Jews have remembered their deliverance from slavery during Passover Seders, as we heard, where matzah are eaten. I got some matzah crackers right there if you want to taste some after the service. Right there. Go on down there and just munch away. That's called bread of affliction. Do you see why that's called bread of affliction? Because they had to get out. They had to get out. But even so, bread of life, Aish and Aisha. And then there is the story of a different kind of oppression, not thousands of years ago, just 150 years ago. Smithsonian Magazine tells the story. The United States forced Indians living in Arizona to make the 300-mile journey known as the Long Walk and to relocate in New Mexico onto land that could not easily support their traditional staples of vegetables and beans, and to prevent the indigenous populations from starving. The government gave them canned foods, canned goods, as well as white flour, processed sugar, and lard, the makings of fry bread. Fry bread appears to be nothing more than fried dough. How many of you tried fry bread? It's like an unsweetened funnel cake, but thicker and softer, full of air bubbles and reservoirs of grease, but it is revered by some as a symbol of native pride and unity. Indian rocker Keith Secola celebrates the food in his popular song, Fry Bread. And Sherman Alexie, the award-winning filmmaker, his award-winning film called Smoke Signals, he has one of his characters wearing a t-shirt that says, Fry Bread Power. Both men call fry bread today's most relevant Native American symbol. They say the food's conflicted status, it represents both perseverance and pain, reflects these same elements in Native American history. Fry bread is the story of our survival, says Sherman Alexie. Bread of affliction too, right? And again, Aish and Aisha. Bread and life. But the bread and life story has a wrinkle in it. Something as powerful as the bread equals life connection, well, it's going to provoke turf wars. You're waiting for the turf war part of the sermon, right? Well, maybe you didn't know you were waiting for it, but here it is. Here it is. We see it in religious history. Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 18 from the Hebrew Bible. It's the key verse here. It's 2,500 years ago. The armies of the great empire of Babylon, they have burst into the city of Jerusalem. They have destroyed the temple, and the Jews have been exiled to strange lands. But why did the God of the Israelites, Yahweh, right? Say that word with me, Yahweh. That is the God of the Israelites. Someone over, Yahweh, over here, I heard that. But why did Yahweh allow this temple to be destroyed? Why did he allow this? Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 18 is the clue. It goes like this. The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead the dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. Now, who do you think the speaker of this passage is? Who is it? Yahweh, right? The prophet is speaking, is channeling Yahweh. Is Yahweh happy? No, wait. That was the real question. Some of you are like, was Yahweh happy? No! He is out of his mind and enraged. Yeah? He is no Unitarian Universalist God. Listen. He is no Unitarian Universalist God who doesn't care where people get their truth and their meaning and their joy from. The Unitarian Universalist God knows that truth and joy and meaning can come from all sorts of sources. And all that the Unitarian Universalist God wants is for us to plug in, to make the time for it. Open up your heart for it. Plug in. Be fed. Give us this day our daily bread. Say that with me. Give us this day our daily bread. That's what the Unitarian Universalist wants. Take that bread in. Eat that bread. And the Unitarian Universalist God goes like this. She says, great. I got bagels. I got baguettes. I got biscuits. I got bocadillo. I got brioche. I got chapatis. I got challah, I got lavash, I got naan, I got pitas, I got pizza, I got pretzels, I got puris, I got tortillas. I got it all. And it is all good. It is all good. But maybe you're confused about bread. You say bread, but it's truly not bread. It's straight up candy. It's Twizzlers or it's Snickers. Okay, says the Unitarian Universalist God. Okay. You're on the road to finding out. No one can force you to learn what bread is. You're going to have to learn in your own time. And I'm definitely not going to threaten you, says the Unitarian Universalist God. I'm not going to threaten you with earthly destruction or with eternal hellfire and damnation until you get your act together, because, says the Unitarian Universalist God, that is not how I roll. What kind of teaching is that anyhow? What kind of teaching is that anyhow? I am not a bully, says the Unitarian Universalist God. This wide universe is safe for your journey. The universe is safe. You are safe. But that's the Unitarian Universalist God. That is not Yahweh. Yahweh wants to be the one and only bread of life. He wants all the bread sacrifices, and no one else gets to have any, especially a female God. That really messes up the divine patriarchy after all, doesn't it? But Yahweh's children disobeyed. They dared to sacrifice sweet cakes like hot cross buns to the Queen of Heaven, which could be seen as another version of Demeter. And so Yahweh allowed them to be destroyed. This is an exclusivist vision of the bread of life. And you know, whenever Jesus is depicted as the sole bread of life, and the Christian Eucharist or communion service argues to be the sole means of celebrating the mystery of beloved community and the mystery of love triumphing over death, well, that is exclusivism. And it is definitely not what we do here. When, for example, during our sunrise Easter service, when we celebrate our Unitarian Universalist Christian communion, and one of the things we say in that service is, the bread we share this day is sacred. Grain, gift of the earth, gives life. The friendship we share this day is sacred. For all gatherings, when people meet and touch, celebrate life. The laughter we share this day is sacred. Joy and sorrow that rise from love are springs of life. The stillness that we share this day is sacred. In this peace is a haven for the spirit that nurtures life, for bread, for friends, for joy and sorrow, for the comfort of quietness. Let us be ever grateful and caring. That is the bread of life. That is our daily bread. Daily, as in epiosios. Super essential. People's spiritual malnutrition is real. And exclusivism only makes it worse. But the bread of life, at least the bread of life that Unitarian Universalists believe in, is all around us. It is plentiful, and all we need to is reach out. All we need to do is reach out and take in. Take, eat. Do this in remembrance of the life abundant that all cultures have known, that all cultures in all times have known. The life abundant that wants abundance for each of us and for all, no exceptions. Do this in remembrance. Take, eat. Aish, Aisha. Amen.